I think the moment that I knew wokeness was different than PC or any of the old previous iterations was when people started getting fired from NFL teams or from NASCAR. You know, why is NASCAR displaying wokeness? You would think that would be the last place you would want to look to find it. Or Wall Street firms. These are not hotbeds of wokeness. And it didn't seem really to be ideological at all. The common pattern was feminization.
Helen Andrews writes in her article, The Great Feminization. The Great Feminization is truly unprecedented. Other civilizations have given women the vote, granted them property rights, or let them inherit the thrones of empire. No civilization in human history has ever experimented with letting women control so many vital institutions of our society, from political parties to universities to our biggest businesses. She begins with a story.
Larry Summers, well, the president of Harvard is always a very powerful person, but I think even by those standards, Larry Summers was an exceptionally powerful president of Harvard. He had been in the Clinton cabinet. He had been at the World Bank. He was one of the most well-connected men in the Democratic Party. He was also enormously accomplished as an academic. He was just a really smart, sharp economist.
In 2006, when a very powerful Democrat, Larry Summers, was dismissed as the president of Harvard, it was foreshadowing of things to come. It was a time when no one really understood what woke actually was. But the way he was dismissed explains how we've gotten to where we are.
The one that mattered more than any other was a controversy where he was completely and entirely correct. And there was, in an objective sense, no scandal really at all. What had happened was the National Bureau of Economic Research had held a conference on women in science. And Summers had been invited to speak on the subject of how to get more women into science. And the remarks were supposed to be off the record, and they were also extemporaneous. So this was not delivered remarks. He was just giving his sincere assessment of where the real barriers to women's advancement in the hard sciences lay. And he identified two. The first is the male and female bell curves in terms of aptitude. You see this in a lot of other characteristics as well, that there are just tend to be more men at the extremes, both extremes, the extremes of lack of intelligence and also extremes of intelligence. So there are simply more men than women way out there at the tail end of the bell curve. And the other is consistent differences in interests. That is, even when you do have women who are high-powered enough upstairs to make it as tenured Ivy League professors, they tend to be drawn to disciplines that involve human beings as opposed to really super abstract things like theoretical physics.
What's very important to remember in this story is that this was supposed to be off the record, number one, and number two, he was a Democrat. So as a powerful Democrat, going after him means that you're going to weaken the opposition party to the Republicans. But even in that particular situation, off the record, they came after him.
So Larry Summers gave these remarks, which were well within the scientific mainstream in terms of psychology and studies that have been done. And yet their response among the women professors in the audience was to say, how dare you? In fact, these women went to a reporter, which they were not supposed to do because the talk was supposed to be off the record. But they went to a reporter and they said, I had to stand up and leave or else I would have fainted, or I was about to throw up. Now, to be clear, there were also some women in the audience who, when the New York Times called them to get their sense of this scandal, there was one economist, Paula Stephen, who gave the quote, this is what happens at a scientific conference. You hear ideas you disagree with, and then you debate them on the basis of reason and evidence. But there were enough women who said that what Larry Summers had said was beyond the pale, that they were able to extract from him not one but three statements of apology and eventually tar him as a misogynist. So these women were able to take down one of the most powerful men in America without ever really offering any evidence or even any argument that he was wrong. They just said that what he said was offensive, made them want to throw up. And that is the style of debate that characterizes wokeness, not having conversations, but shutting down conversations.
Sing it with me. Stop giving me microphones.
If you look at survey data, women are much less in favor of free speech than men. Typically, if you ask women, would you allow to speak on your campus somebody who said that transgenderism was a mental illness? Would you allow to speak on your campus somebody who said that Black Lives Matter is a hate group? Women are much more likely to say, no, shut that down. And men are much more likely to say, well, I disagree, but let him speak and we'll talk it out. Wokeness seems to me like a repudiation of rational debate.
Yeah! Stop giving. All right, we're going to take it to church now, everybody. Now everyone sing it with me.
Her article continues, men group dynamics favor consensus and cooperation. Men order each other around, but women can only suggest and persuade. Any criticism or negative sentiment, if it absolutely must be expressed, needs to be buried in layers of compliments. The outcome of a discussion is less important than the fact that the discussion was held and everyone participated in it. The most important sex difference in group dynamics is the attitude to conflict. In short, men wage conflict openly, while women covertly undermine or ostracize their enemies.
The Washington Post recently awarded you 4 Pinocchios.
Oh my goodness.
For misstating some statistics about Pentagon spending.
If people want to really blow up one figure here or one word there, I would argue that they're missing the forest for the trees. I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
But being factually correct is important.
It's absolutely important. And whenever I make a mistake, I say, okay, this was clumsy. And then I restate what my point was. But it's not the same thing as the president lying about immigrants. It's not the same thing at all.
Well, one of the most important aspects of this story is that he thought he was off the record. He was off the record. And the rules of off the record say that you can't take quotes from somebody's off the record speech and hand them to a journalist. But one of the classic differences between men and women is that men are more likely to be invested in rules, whereas women are more likely to focus on the outcome that they want, that they think is going to be best, and kind of fudge the rules to get their way to the outcome that they want.
But one of the most significant differences, critical for moving from polarization to productivity, is that the Wikipedians who write these articles aren't actually focused on finding the truth. They're working for something that's a little bit more attainable, which is the best of what we can know right now. And after 7 years there, I actually believe that they're onto something. That for our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth isn't necessarily the best place to start. In fact, I think our reverence for the truth might have become a bit of a distraction that is preventing us from finding consensus and getting important things done.
Watching both of these interviews as well as reading the article itself, I had several aha moments, one, of course, being about the idea of marriage itself. Sometime in the last 50, 75 years, instead of marriage being through sickness and in health, rich or poor, until death do you part, it became, it's his job to make me happy and give me all of the things out of life that I can't obtain myself or are due to me. And if you go into marriage thinking that's what marriage is, and you fudge the rules to where he thinks his job is to protect and provide and try and make me happy, but I want to be a little bit happier and I want to go date other guys. Oh, by the way, I want possession of the children and I want the house and I want continued financial support from you. Then you don't see that these process, the rules themselves mean that society itself relies on people protecting the family union. It's, I'm trying to get my end outcome, my goal of what I want out of life, which is his money and the house that we lived in and the children, and I don't care what happens after that. Then you get what we have now. But this feminization was also spoken about in the workplace here.
I believe that the Great Feminization is artificial. It is the result of social engineering. It is not just the result of women organically out-competing men in the fields of the academy or business. It is because of incentives to hire more women and promote more women that are the result of laws that have been passed in the United States. So I think that if we simply get rid of all of the hiring targets that currently exist at large corporations, saying that you have to have a certain proportion of your employees be female, if we get rid of the legal protections that exist around feminization in terms of HR that say you can't have a masculine atmosphere at your workplace because having a having a bro club atmosphere in your workplace is currently illegal. A woman who's in that workplace can sue her employer saying, I feel like success at my office is determined by how well you go along with being one of the boys. Therefore, I'm being discriminated against. And a woman who brought that lawsuit would stand a good chance of success. That is a problem, and that leads employers to feminize
their workplace to a greater degree than they would otherwise if left to their own devices.
When you go into work tomorrow, I want you to remember that a lot of the reasons why your teammates or leaders are being trashed to you isn't necessarily because of anything you're doing. It's entirely because they themselves hate their lives, and because they do not have the emotional intelligence to be able to recognize that they're projecting onto you. You are being receptive to it because you're empathetic, and because you're empathetic, you are going to allow yourself to be impacted by feelings that do not belong to you.
You cannot be a good employee in a bad environment, no matter what. No exceptions. And I feel like we need to have this talk after seeing some comments on my videos where when I describe a toxic environment, people will say things like, well, just go do your job and go home and leave it at work. Or they'll say things like, oh, it's all in your mindset. If you just have the right attitude and the right mindset. Not only do I really not agree with these, I think they're actually kind of dangerous. First, the whole just go to work, do your job, and go home and everything will be fine. How is that the solution? The bar is literally on the floor, apparently.
The most dangerous person in a toxic workplace is not the bully. It's the enabler, the one with the power to act and doesn't. They see what's happening. They hear the complaints. But instead of stepping in, they step aside. Handle it between yourselves, they say, because that's easier than confrontation. They think staying out of it keeps them neutral. It doesn't. It keeps them comfortable. And every time they look away, they teach everyone else that silence is how this place works. Toxic workplaces don't thrive because of bullies. They thrive because the people in power choose comfort over courage.
5 signs you are in an emotionally toxic workplace. Number 1, you're treated like a robot. There's no regard for your well-being. You're expected to push through exhaustion, hide your feelings, and never question anything. Profit is the only thing that matters. And yes, it matters, but when it costs you your mental health, your boundaries, and your basic dignity, the system is broken.
So one thing that I've learned about working in corporate America that I didn't know right after I graduated law school is that if someone makes you feel really stupid for not knowing something, or if someone gets really annoyed with you for simply asking questions, then sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes that's called projection. That's called workplace gaslighting. It's because they don't know it themselves and you were supposed to figure it out for them and you couldn't, and that's why they're annoyed. Like if someone goes out of their way to make you feel like an idiot, then something sus is going on.
The threat posted by Wokeness can be large or small depending on the industry. It's sad that English departments are all feminized now, but most people's daily lives are unaffected by it. Other fields matter more. You might not be a journalist, but you live in a country where what gets written in the New York Times determines what is publicly accepted as truth. If the New York Times becomes a place where in-group consensus can suppress unpopular facts more so than it already does, that affects every citizen.
And this is why the Great Feminization thesis resonates with me so strongly, is because just the timing fits. Law schools became majority female in 2016. Other institutions that became majority female in the last 10 years, often the last 5 years, university professors. You thought it would have been earlier. I would have guessed it would have been earlier, but no, that tipped over only just in the last 5 years. Medical schools became majority female in the last 5 years. The white-collar workforce overall, most workers with a college degree in America are women. And imagine going back a century and explaining that to somebody. We had been debating whether women could be in the professional workforce at all, and now they were a majority of the workers in your economy. That's astonishing and definitely an inversion of ordinary human family-forming patterns. Managers in America, management positions, 46% of those management positions today are held by women, so not quite a majority, but getting there. I talked before about veterinary medicine and how that's 80% female. That's also the case in psychology. 75% of PhDs and the topic of psychology today are awarded to women. And that particular field, I think, is an important one for us to study because that is a field where feminization has clearly not been the result of women just out-competing men. There are some people who look at law schools and white-collar workers tipping majority female and say, well, men, you just got to get your act together. You're getting your butt kicked. Come on. It's just that women are that much better in these fields, right? Like you would expect them to rise to their share of the population and then stay roughly in that ballpark thereafter. But that's not what we see happen. Even in law schools, they were 50% female and they've gotten more female every year since. The staff of the New York Times got 50% female and then a little bit more female. And now I think it's 55, 56%.
The field that frightens me most is the law. All of us depend on a functioning legal system, and to be blunt, the rule of law will not survive the legal profession becoming majority female. The rule of law is not just about writing rules down. It means following them even when they yield an outcome that tugs at your heartstrings or runs contrary to your gut sense of which party is more sympathetic.
I think that there's a lot of people more concerned about being precisely, factually, and semantically correct than about being morally right.
That for our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth isn't necessarily the best place to start. In fact, I think our reverence for the truth might have become a bit of a distraction that is preventing us from finding consensus and getting important things done.
The Great Feminization is huge and unprecedented and a demographic reality. It has the potential to ruin civilization in one of two ways, or maybe both ways. One would be cratering birth rates, and the other would be feminizing our institutions to the point where they no longer function. So those are two huge problems staring our society in the face. And I see a lot of people talking about the birth rates one, which is good because we don't have a good solution to that one yet. We need to talk about it more until we figure out what to do about it. But I don't see a lot of people talking about the feminization of our institutions problem.
Let's talk about the feminization of our institutions. You're incredibly concerned about the Great Feminization's impact on the legal profession, in particular, the rule of law. Why?
Because I think that the feminization of the law will tend to make our grown-up legal system look more and more like the Title IX courts that we had for sexual assault on college campuses, which removed due process protections because who was going to benefit from them? Men. And they were probably all rapists anyway, so who cares? And then some of the court cases that arose out of the Me Too movement also violated some really important due process protections. I think there were huge flaws in the Harvey Weinstein New York court case, which is why the New York Court of Appeals later overturned that conviction, because there were so many problems with that court case and so many instances of due process that were violated. It was as if we all decided that Harvey Weinstein was a bad guy, therefore he needed to be in jail, regardless of what the actual legal outcome, whether the prosecution proved their case or not.
Some would say, as a black man, that maybe we shouldn't be worried about how the law is practiced because either way we're going to not get the best outcomes. But it's a metaphor for how institutions run. I would say that in the black community, we understand that because oftentimes our families and our society and the way things run in the black community are dictated by a certain person's feelings. And if a certain person wants something or they want things to turn out a certain way, then that person makes things turn out the way that they want so they get the outcome that they want. And then you find a way to justify how it happened later. But we're not talking about the black community here. We're talking about the whole of Western society. Is it going to run on ABC, Law 1, Law 2, Law 3, or is it going to run on how handsome you look in the courtroom? And are you going to have a group of young women outside chanting your name because you're really cute, and maybe even your lawyer thinks you're cute? Now, that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but it's there. And the idea that we can say that just the way things run in general, if things are running because I feel a certain way, or I want certain things, or I want a certain outcome because I like this guy, that's going to be a very difficult workplace. It's going to be a very difficult courtroom. It's going to be a very difficult way to run business. And in the end, what we've grown to know is probably going to suffer mainly because it's not working that way anywhere else. I've seen workplaces in the country I'm in, and it's not feminized. And when a woman becomes the boss, she works 80 hours a week, just like a man would. And never once do you hear about her feelings about the workplace. And the idea that the West is going to compete with those workplaces, with feminization and those types of ideas, let's just say I can understand why Donald Trump became president. Because otherwise, there's no possibility of competing thinking that way. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment below. I'll catch you next video. Take care.